Welcome again to Project Management, lecture number 5 in a series of lectures towards passing the PMI Certified Associate Project Manager exam. In this lecture, I'm going to discuss from a project process flow standpoint how a project develops from the initial idea all the way to the project selection. In this presentation, a process flow visual representation demonstrates how a project begins from an idea until the project lifecycle approach is selected. Two web links explain the difference between the waterfall approach and agile approaches. To remind you, the project initiation, first we start out with a need, opportunity, or a threat. Someone identifies that. Next step is developing a business case and doing research as to why, to explain to people why a project should be needed or done to address this need or threat or opportunity. Then a feasibility study is conducted, and the feasibility study is conducted to determine whether or not we have the capability or there is a capability and being successful with a project to address the need, opportunity, or threat. Next, a project charter is developed, and a project charter means that someone has signed off and said, yeah, we need to do this. We looked at the feasibility study and it looks like we should do this project. After that, a team is developed, project manager is assigned, project sponsor from executive management generally sponsors the project, and they help facilitate the project, provide resources. If a project office is available, then the project documentation is helped out by a project team, and then afterwards, once the project is conducted and completed, there's a review to see if we're on the right track for pursuing this project. Here we see a big, ugly process flow view of getting from initially, noticing here, starting with the idea and all the things that need to happen along with valuable notes and references, getting us all the way to beginning the project and having selected a project lifecycle approach. All of these sections will be broken down and discussed in these later slides. So from the process flow chart, here's an exploded portion of the top half of the flow chart. So here's where we start, down here. Okay, so we start here. You're at work, whatever location, organization, and somebody says, oh, I think something's wrong. Looks like we have an opportunity, there's a threat, there is a gap in what we're doing, and I think this could be improved upon. So once that is done, you would take the idea to other people, and hopefully if it's an organization that has a project management team, they would know to start using elicitation techniques. And it doesn't have to be a formalized thing, but oftentimes it is very formalized because you want to get good information, and that information is going to be used to develop a business case. So some elicitation techniques are benchmarking, competitive analysis, document analysis, interviewing people, doing a market analysis, and prototyping. After that, the next step in the process would be to assess the current state. And you want to ask yourself, who are our stakeholders? Are we addressing their present and future needs? If we do a project and we need to problem solve something, will this help out so we can accommodate them? Some things that need to be considered at this point when you're doing the assessing the current state is you need to consider what's known as, from PMI, is enterprise environmental factors. In essence, you're asking questions about the environment in which your organization works. Is the culture appropriate for change, or are they ready for change? Do we have the correct people in proper positions with the capabilities? Do we have the facilities? Are we in the correct position financially? Those are things that would be environmental factors to consider. There's something else called organizational process assets, OPAs according to PMI. You would be asking the questions, do we have the appropriate things in place? Do we have policies and procedures? And a lot of places, they may have them in place, but they don't go by them. And that can be a downfall to any project. Are there templates for documents that we can use? Because maybe we've already done projects and we've considered from what's known as lessons learned in project management from PMI. We've done an analysis that, okay, we need to have these things for when we do them next time. We look at previous projects. We look at software tools that we have on hand that we can use. For instance, if you use MS Office Suite, they have a variety of tools that can be used towards project management. There might be databases for information internally within your organization or where you're going to do the project at that organization. Next, as I said before, lessons learned, looking at other projects, what we have done and what we have figured out we did poorly or what we did well and where we need to improve for next time we do a project. Next, historical information. We look at what is done in the past, what has been successful, what's not been successful. Performance records, that would be the organization, individuals involved, the outcome of previous projects, and things like that. And then the organizational culture, once again. Once we've assessed the current state, we move on to develop a situation statement. In a situation statement, a discussion of the opportunity, threat, or risk is outlined. Provide a context. Why is this happening? What has happened? We do an impact analysis, and that is really to consider the consequences for all of the stakeholders. We do a root cause analysis of the problem. We develop supporting data, and we assess and write the current state. After developing a situation statement, we move on to what's known as a project proposal. In a project proposal, you might have an executive summary. You have a project description, a project objective or objectives, a project scope, methodology and project approach to complete the project, a timeline and work plan, budget, team composition. You're considering what would be a team composition, the risks and how you might mitigate those, project deliverables, those would be identified. Also, communication plan and evaluation plan to monitor, measure, and determine success for the project. Once that's together, develop a business case. Components of a business case include, again, an executive summary. And if you haven't already noticed, you've already got previous information that can apply and go to the business case. So really this is a process of developing information and repackaging it in a different way to provide to different people. Specifically, at the beginning, executive management stakeholders who will sign off at the project charter to get your project going. So there's going to be a problem statement. Problem statement clearly defines the business or issue or opportunity at hand that needs to be addressed with the project. There'll be a strategic context. In other words, we're saying why at a high level this should be done and how this is going to help out the organization. There might be a cost-benefit analysis. There's different types of tools involved with that. Financial case developed. If we do this and put this amount in or do these things, we might benefit by a ratio of 1.5 to 1. So we come out 50% greater than what we had before. Suggest a project plan, include a project scope, a timeline, milestones, and necessary resources. Again, might include the risk assessment, or you would include a risk assessment, identify potential risks and mitigating strategies to the risk. Then an implementation plan. And that's saying we're going to have these people in this project and do these things at this time according to these baselines for cost and scheduling. And then recommendations. In the business case, one thing that has to be in there is providing a recommendation of what should be done for a project and the preferred solution based upon the analytics from all of these previous 8 topics. Something that you might want to include or consider is, should we be using a business analyst when we're doing a business case? Why? Because they're numbers people and they're generally have intimate knowledge of the organization for which the project is being undertaken. The next part of the project initiation process is the feasibility study. Feasibility study is conducted as a preliminary analysis, both qualitatively, okay, so in other words, it's either account or developing or describing the standards of what something should be or look like, or it may be quantitative, and quantitative means that you are counting or holding something up to a unit of measure or a benchmark. So you gather relevant stakeholders, that information, you explore alternative business scenarios, and then you determine, okay, are we at the point, is this feasible, can we do that? So at this point, once the feasibility study is done, it needs to be taken a look at by executive management. That would be the people that are going to sign off and say, okay, it looks like this is feasible based upon the business case and the feasibility study, and now we're going to approve that. Okay, so as I have in here, decisions made, executive management stakeholders studied those documents and all that information. The organizational leadership assesses the feasibility study. Will the outcome of the proposed project enhance the organization's situation? Some measurement tools might be net present value, return on investment, internal rate of review, and cost of benefit analysis. And then a statement of work might be developed. Generally speaking, a statement of work is used for external stakeholders. It's to inform them that we're doing a project, or at least we're considering a project, and might you be available to provide us services? It's often used in statement of work with incremental and iterative projects. So what is in a statement of work? You'll have a project name, a justification and objectives, project deliverables, project boundaries. You'll say what's in the project and what's outside of the project. So if a service provider, they can provide a number of things, and they might want to say, oh, well, we can do this, but we can offer you more. That would be something to consider, and it might be something to say, no, we don't need that in the project. You identify the key stakeholders, the project constraints. For instance, a project constraint might say that we want to start this project on June 1st and end it by September 31st. We might also want to say that we're going to live within some monetary value of, say, $100,000 for the project. There will be assumptions. Assumptions are things that we say that are true, and we don't necessarily have to have empirical evidence to say that's true. It's just information that we are working off of, and we assume it to be true or accurate or valid. Then you have an acceptance criteria. An acceptance criteria, especially for third-party vendors or service providers, would say, okay, you need to state what you can provide for us, and then we will tell you in what conditions we will accept and use you. Scope change management, that would go with the acceptance criterion. You might say, okay, here's the beginning scope of this project. things might come along that have to change, and then we'll need to negotiate in terms of resources, price, cost, things like that, how we're going to deal with those things. Again, project exclusions, that would go within the scope of the change management plan, and then you're going to consider dependencies. So for instance, let's say you're going to use two different types of contractors. You might need a plumber and let's say an excavator. Well, obviously the excavation has to be done before we're going to use the project, or the plumbers. Okay, so that's a statement of work. Afterwards, we get all this information together again, and as I said before, the information's flowing along. A lot of it is redundant in these documents. We get to the project charter. A project charter is a high-level overview of the project, and it includes, at the very least base level, project objectives, a project scope, identification of key stakeholders, a project budget with estimated costs, resources, and time, a project schedule, potential risks, obstacles, and challenges that might impact the project, and mitigating strategies to those things. And then the risk management and mitigation plan. The next likely step in the process after the project charter has been approved is executive management identifies a project sponsor. They're probably doing that when they're looking at the project charter. Okay, so once a project sponsor is selected, and oftentimes a project sponsor is somebody that is from the executive management team, and so they will be that project sponsor will be someone that is saying, I am going to help facilitate this project. I'll be the go-to person, especially if a risk occurs that we need to accept, or there is a challenge that occurs that is outside of the scope or the capability of the project manager and project management team. Okay, so the sponsor is identified and a project manager is identified and officially named. After that, the project manager and project sponsor likely together will get together and discuss and develop the project team with an appropriate structure. As I talked about in a previous lecture, there are functional teams, there is matrix teams, there are weak, balanced, and strong matrix teams. And so that would be a consideration of what's going to be involved to do this project. Afterwards, the next step in the project process is the project manager, the project sponsor, the business analyst. They make sure that the project goals and outcomes and values and goals all align. So they're going to consider all those documents, and the point person with this would be the project sponsor to relay all that information to the project manager and project management team. So next in the process is the project manager decides on a project lifecycle approach, and obviously they're going to get approval from the project sponsor, who will likely go back to executive management, and they will sign off, or they will give at least some tacit approval to that approach. Afterwards, a development of a stakeholders communication plan is developed and put in place, and especially for executive management, so they're aware of the scheduling and the costs and the budgeting and things like that that are going to impact the organization. You're also going to identify people in the community or in the market that are going to be impacted by this project. Then a project kickoff meeting is held. You're going to go through a whole lot of information to get the project team up and running and started, and afterwards communicate to executive management stakeholders that the kickoff meeting has occurred. Typically it's going to be an email, and tell them we're underway and we are off and running. With that said, the project begins, and with the project either going to identify as having a predictive waterfall approach, an incremental, iterative, or some type of hybrid, including all three of the above, as the approach that's going to be used for this project. Here we're looking at an exploded version of what I was talking about before, and also this link does a very good job explaining the differences in these approaches, so I highly recommend reviewing it. I also highly recommend reviewing these links, especially from David McLaughlin, and he discusses the difference between Agile versus waterfall approach for project planning. And they're useful for explaining the process flow that I just outlined. With the end of this lecture, be able to describe the project initiation process and the steps involved with it and the particulars as I've outlined it. Now, one thing to say at the very end of this, that the process flow can be quite elaborate, but it's dependent on the project that you're involved with, how detailed it needs to be, and that's going to be dependent a lot on those stakeholders and what they're going to need to buy into the project and support the project. With that said, look for me in the next lecture. Thank you.